Hi, this is Ed Brisson, and you're listening to the Nerd Byword podcast.
Welcome into another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very special interview with comic book writer Ed Brisson. He's got a brand new Kickstarter project called Catch and Release, a murder book story, which is in a lot of ways a return to what really helped him catch a big break in the comic book writing industry. But first, nerd news, and Dave is headed to a galaxy far, far away with a very sticky situation. Dave, what's going on?
Yeah, science fiction fans know Alan Dean Foster. At a minimum, they should know that he wrote a novelization of the original Star Wars movie, as well as its first sequel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, before Empire Strikes Back was even a thing. He has also written the novelizations for Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3, as well as tons of original work. And now he is alleging that he is not receiving royalties for his works anymore after Disney bought the publishers of these books. He held a press conference with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America to call out Disney and to make sure that the same problem isn't happening to other writers as well. His allegation is simple. Disney claims to have bought the publishing rights to his work, but not the contractual obligation to pay the creators as originally agreed upon. Now, Mary Robinette Kowal, the president of the SFWA, said, and I quote, "Disney's argument is that they have purchased the rights but not the obligations of the contract. In other words, they believe they have the right to publish work, but are not obligated to pay the writer, no matter what the contract says. If we let this stand, it could set a precedent to fundamentally alter the way copyright and contracts operate in the United States. All a publisher would have to do to break a contract would be to sell it to a sibling company." After having several conversations about creators' rights on this show, Kris, including with some prolific guests, this story has shaken me to my core. Disney is one of the largest holders of quote-unquote intellectual property in the world. They own both Star Wars and Marvel, two properties that I feel very passionate about. The notion that they can simply decide to stop paying creators is frankly outrageous. It almost makes my blood boil. What is it with companies that make money off of nerd properties constantly trying to screw their creators out of payment? These are the people that fill their coffers. It's a disgrace, plain and simple. Kris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm right of the same vein right here. The moment I saw this headline, I thought of our interview in our discussion with Paul Jenkins about, creators' rights and, standing up for the little guy. And I remember, I think it was Al Milgrom, who was such a prolific writer for Marvel, back in the 80s, had such serious health problems. And, his brother was having to go on to Kickstarter or GoFundMe or something of that nature just to help with his medical bills. And right here, Foster said that that his wife has serious medical issues and that he himself was diagnosed with an advanced form of cancer in 2016. And in the grand scope of things, this is less than a drop of a bucket. This is like less than a single H2O molecule in the scope of what Disney is making on those profits. Even in a time with the pandemic where a lot of corporations, a lot of businesses are struggling, Disney is not one of those companies. Disney is not suffering in the least. So to not be able to take care of their employees, this has like the same type of vibes of like Vince McMahon and the WWE, and we watch all the wrestlers that we grew up idolizing dying because they have no rights whatsoever, and there's no unionization, and you also had like Zelina Vega, I think it was, came out and said, "I support unionization," and 10 minutes later, the WWE released a press release that they have, arrived at an agreement to part ways with her. So it's absolutely crazy that these big corporations are just gobbling up everything, and it's incredibly frustrating.
It's exploitative is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes right down to it, I don't like Star Wars because Disney owns it. I like Star Wars for the creators that are putting this work out there. You know, Jon Favreau, for example, and Dave Filoni doing the Mandalorian, such a great show. Whether Disney's name is on that or not is completely irrelevant to me. It is the creative force behind it that makes it relevant to us as fans. And so Disney, obviously, financing all this stuff and owning the property should get their cut. But let's not cut out the creators who are literally filling their coffers. It is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and I always go back to what Paul said in that interview was, Marvel does not write the titles. DC does not write those titles. Paul Jenkins writes those titles. Jonathan Hickman writes those titles, or Jerry Conway, writes those titles. It's the creators that are doing the work here. So even if it's some small portion, whatever, be careful what you sign, with the contract. So read the fine print, but at the same time, like, this is bad business. This is just despicable.
Totally agreed. Now, Kris, maybe you have something a little more positive for us this week. What is your nerd news story?
Well, this wasn't really news with the way that Avengers Endgame, ended up with Thor sitting on the Milano, going back and forth with Star-Lord about who is in charge. It's not really surprising, but it is officially confirmed that Chris Pratt and Vin Diesel both are going to reprise their roles as Star-Lord and Groot in Thor: Love and Thunder. And in a year where we didn't get a lot of positive things like 2020, a lot of happy news. This gives me something to look forward to, in the entertainment realm. This is probably the MCU entry that's been announced that I'm most looking forward to. Especially on the heels of Thor Ragnarok and Taika Waititi returning as the director, and Tessa Thompson is an absolute revelation as Valkyrie. The chemistry between the Chris's, Hemsworth and Pratt is just so amazing, and it's so wonderful. It's so funny, and I'm just excited to see where this story goes. Not to mention, you have Natalie Portman returning as Jane Foster, and she's going to wield the hammer, Dave, and that's all I need.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, you I don't know what to tell you, man. You and I don't disagree often, but this is one that I don't 100% agree on. I am not excited about this situation. I know Dave is being contrary again. Hear me out, though. I didn't like the interaction between Star-Lord and Thor in Endgame. Individually, these are great characters, but the way they bounced off of each other in that movie, while played for laughs, came across more to me like two jerks engaged in a metaphorical measuring contest. It didn't feel fun or humorous as those characters individually did in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and Thor Ragnarok, respectively. It just didn't land for me. And so this doesn't exactly excite me. More importantly, I'm starting to grow increasingly weary of every movie having to be a crossover of some kind. I've complained a lot about how The Flash appears to have at least 50 Batmen in it. Now Thor gets Star-Lord, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness needs Scarlet Witch, and on and on and on. I enjoy a good comic book crossover between two characters occasionally, but that's how they happen in the comic books. Occasionally. If I'm reading Superman, I get most of the time Superman stories. Once a year, Batman might show up, sure, but for the most part, I get to enjoy my favorite characters' solo adventures. And then there's the fact that this is also supposed to be Jane Foster's movie. This is the story of Lady Thor, for a lack of a better term. And I'm super excited to see this adapted to the big screen. That's what I really want to focus on. Do I really need, two male characters, quote unquote, humorously engaging in a measuring contest when I'm trying to enjoy an adaptation of a fantastic female character? Now, don't get me wrong. I love Star-Lord. In the Guardians movies, he comes across as a deeply flawed but ultimately lovable goof. In the Avengers movies, though, I feel like they almost engaged in a hint of character assassination when it came to Star-Lord. He comes across as a stupid jerk. I prefer my Star-Lord jerky-free, and ultimately I'm worried that pairing him again with Thor is just going to leave us with echoes of their interaction in Endgame.
I can definitely appreciate your take on that, and I definitely see where you're coming from. Now, maybe this will give you some hope for it. It was listed as a cameo in some of the articles that I read, so I think it would be a huge mistake for them to take up more than say 15 to 20 minutes screen time for this. Because Love and Thunder, being the moniker, I think as you said that Jane should be the featured story arc for this film. So I'm hopeful for that, and I do agree with the over use of crossovers as well, and I think some of the best superhero films are character focused and not too overcomplicated and overinflated.
And I will say, maybe I'm being overly negative here. I mean, the one thing that Thor Love and Thunder has that Avengers Endgame did not have is Taika Waititi. And he has a great ear for comedic dialogue. And I loved his Thor Ragnarok. And if anybody can sort of redeem the interactions between Star-Lord and Thor for me, I would say it's probably him.
And I think, I'm not certain, but I do know that James Gunn was directly involved in the dialogue for the Guardians in Infinity War, and if I'm stacking those two up, I enjoyed the Thor and the Guardians interactions far more than the ones in Endgame.
I totally agree with that assessment. There was just something off about, to me at least, about that entire ending scene with Thor on the Milano. It felt uncomfortable. I don't know if it was misdirected, if it was miswritten, but it did not land at all.
Yeah, I my mind is a little bit fuzzy of the timeline with James Gunn, as he was fired from Disney and then came back. My gut tells me, just if I'm remembering correctly, that this was during the time that he was not involved with the MCU. So that's probably a huge factor at play there. All right, that wraps up our Nerd News segment. When we come back from our first break, we're going to sit down with Ed Brisson, comic book writer, and talk about his work for Marvel titles, and also his new project, Catch and Release, a murder book story. Stick around. Welcome back, nerds. For our Byword Big Talk this week, we're sitting down with comic book writer Ed Brisson. You've seen his work for Marvel Comics with titles like The New Mutants, Ghost Rider, Old Man and Dead Man Logan. He's got a new Kickstarter coming out called Catch and Release, a murder book story. Ed, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We always like to start an interview with our guest origin story. Every nerd loves a good origin story. How did all of this get started for you, both nerdy things and as a writer as well?
In terms of like my interest in comics, my mom used to drag us down to the used bookstore all the time, every weekend, pretty much when we were kids. And my mom is someone who takes a very long time in any store that she's in. And so would plunk us down in front of the long boxes that were sitting by the front door of the comic shop. And I would usually blow my allowance on comics, from the time, I guess I was about, I want to say I was like 7 or 8. And yeah, I would just buy 10-cent comics from the comic box. I got $2 a week in allowance. So that was 20 comics I could usually go through. I think I'd usually buy 10 comics and then save the rest for junk food. But I started out reading. I think the first comics I remember reading, and I know time-wise these are not the actual first, but these are the first comics I remember picking up, were things like Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham, and Captain Carrot and his Amazing Zoo Crew. I was really into that stuff at the beginning, and then from there I started getting into I think weirdly I learned more about Spider-Man and his rogues gallery through the punny versions of them in Spider-Ham. So it was weird for me to come over and start reading Spider-Man and see the actual real life version, or not real life, but you get what I mean. So yeah, from there I just started picking up Spider-Man, Daredevil. I was really into the Transformers and G.I. Joe comics that were coming out at the time. The Nom as well was a big one for me, early days. And lots of X-Men, right from, oh God, like dating myself here, but from around the mid 80s, I was reading a ton of X-Men stuff as well. And in terms of me getting into comic book writing, I actually initially had no interest in being a comic book writer. What I wanted to do, and I think this probably is common with a lot of writers, is I wanted to be a comic book artist. And I used to take night classes in art when I was younger. When I graduated high school, I went to fine arts to try and hone my skills. And I started drawing comics in like I'd always been drawing comics in high school, but like trying to really get into it in around 93, 94. And I only started writing because it's sort of early days for the internet. So I didn't know any comic book writers. I didn't have any really tools available to get in touch with comic book writers. I met one local guy who wanted to be or actually two local guys who wanted to be comic book writers through my comic book shop, but they weren't good writers, and they were also just weirdly, they're jerks, like just super arrogant about their scripts, but were that sort of like nightmare writer that I think many artists dread, and that they felt that they were the sole driving force behind this, and you're just sort of the person who's there to make their dreams a reality. And so I didn't want to work with those guys, and so I just started writing scripts for myself purely so I would have something to draw. And I started writing and drawing and sort of publishing mini comics, what some folks I guess would call ashcans now, but back then we called them mini comics that just run off at the photocopy shop. I used to walk around. I lived in Kelowna, it's British Columbia at the time, and I would walk around selling comics out of my backpack. I would sell them through the local record shop, through the local comic stores, and I kind of just did that for 16 years. I just self-published comics. Both, I put them out in print and bring them to comic shops to sell on consignment or what have you, or I would do stuff online. And I did that up until 2010. And 2010, on my birthday, I was just sort of like really frustrated with how everything was going. I wasn't really getting anywhere in terms of having a career in comics. I'd gone to college for something else at that point and had a career working in health and safety of all things, but still really wanted to do comic books. And so I had like this sort of real sit down talk with myself, and decided that a few things. One was that I really didn't like drawing. It was a thing that I kept doing because I thought that's what I wanted to do when I was younger. But I find it a very frustrating process, which I'm sure most artists do, but it was just something I did not enjoy and couldn't see doing as a career. But I did really enjoy writing. And so I decided that day just to sort of sit down and focus on just writing, and started writing a series that eventually was called Murder Book, which was just short crime stories that I would team up with artists who I knew. And, I was lucky enough to have a lot of friends who were artists. After having been doing comics for 16 years, you meet a lot of people along the way, and managed to sort of con a few artist friends into drawing some of the Murder Book stories. And then once they were done, I would throw them up online for free for folks to read. And it was sort of through that I guess got discovered, even though at that point I'd sort of given up on the idea of really getting in with any of the publishers, and was just sort of making these comics to kind of satisfy myself. And for some reason that resonated with publishers, and I ended up working with DC a little bit, Image and Boom and Dark Horse and IDW, and now I'm at Marvel.
And in a lot of ways, your Marvel stuff has really stood out to us. In writing the New Mutants and Empire X-Men, you were one of the individuals on the creative team behind the Dawn of X titles for the X-Men. What was it like being involved in something so large scale, so intricate? There's a very different direction for the X-Men. What was that process like for you?
So that whole thing is really, it's Jonathan Hickman's baby. I'd been doing some X-Men stuff before that, and he asked if I was interested in working on that stuff. I think I knew a couple years before it came out what was happening, what it was going to be all about. And it's Hickman's done some really big stuff at Marvel, and this felt early days like it was going to be another sort of giant and new direction, I guess, for the X-Men. And so, yeah, it just kind of felt like it was kind of weird being part of something that you knew that was probably going to blow up and become huge. And honestly, I was just kind of tagging along for the ride, and just kind of doing the stuff that I like doing still, and trying to find a way to make it fit in this sort of new era, I guess, of the X-Men.
Did you get a chance, having written New Mutants recently, did you get a chance to see the film and kind of see those characters brought to the screen?
I haven't seen that film yet. I know it's come out on iTunes. I'm interested to see it. It's I'm very curious because it looks like Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Like from the trailer, it looks like they just made a superhero version of Nightmare on Elm Street 3. So I'm curious to see how true that actually is.
That's not too far off, actually.
And just seeing those characters on the big screen, not that big, this is a screen in my living room, is kind of, I'm kind of excited, but just haven't, I know it's gotten sort of not great reviews. So I'm kind of stealing myself a little bit and letting that all die down, and we'll probably watch it in a month or two.
Yeah, we actually did a review for a couple episodes back, and it's very much a product of like the odd transition, from Fox to back to to Disney. So but overall I think we both enjoyed it, and it's seeing those characters represented on screen was a big part for me, especially Roberto da Costa, who's one of the greatest characters in all of comics.
All right, well, we'll see. I'm skeptical, but I'm hopeful.
So you've written for both Old Man Logan and Dead Man Logan. What is it about Wolverine that keeps people coming back for more even after all this time? Not just from a writer's perspective, but even for fans. He's one of the most popular characters in comics.
I think it's because Wolverine's awesome. He's just, I don't know. I think it's just, he's kind of an outlier even within the X-Men. I think that, folks like that he's a dude who's ready to get his hands dirty and kind of do what needs to get done. And I don't know. I think people love that. People are just drawn to that sort of grumpy, hairy dude with claws who just doesn't mess around, For me, growing up, it was always cool to see that there was a Canadian character, based out of Canada. So the fact that Wolverine was Canadian was always great to me. I remember seeing, I think it was the first animated X-Men special where he had an Australian accent for some reason.
Oh, yes, Pride of the X-Men. Yes, I remember that one.
We were flipping tables up here in Canada. We were so mad. But I think that's, for me, it's because he sort of rolls by his own code that's separate and often clashes with the rest of the X-Men, which I think makes him interesting in that you can send them to some dark places. You can send them off in some really interesting missions. He's got like a really tragic past that is, from a story writing standpoint, a gold mine to dip into and explore. Yeah, I think he's just a fun character who's got a lot of interesting stuff. He's probably received the most development out of, I think, all the X-Men characters are fairly well developed, but he's just got such a crazy rich history that there's just tons to do with him.
I think for me is I'm a massive X-Men fan. I think one of the most interesting thing, even through the years of reading Logan's story is like how he's constantly juxtaposed against and has closer relationships, but juxtaposed with different personalities. Like his relationship with Nightcrawler is one of my favorites. His relationship with like Jubilee and Kitty Pryde is just so interesting to see how different these characters can be, and yet they have such a closeness in their relationships.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like he's such a gruff personality, but he really does have a big heart. When you see him around Jubilee or other characters like that, you get to see how sort of nurturing this guy is really, how nurturing he's capable of being, which is such a nice juxtaposition from what he's like in the battlefield. And I think the relationship he has with a lot of the characters, especially the younger characters, I find he takes on a really great sort of mentor or father figures type of role with a lot of those characters. That is really interesting to play around with.
We're always interested on our show to get a peek behind the curtain when we get to talk to a creator, about the working relationship between writers and artists on comic books. When I think about my most recent experience with your work was on New Mutants, and the things that Rod Rice did on pages there is just insane. So how does that process usually work for books that you've been a part of? Is it typically separate, here's a script, draw the pages, or is it more collaborative?
It varies from artist to artist and project to project. Sometimes you'll have an artist who just wants to take the script and just go off and do it. I think when I find out who the artist is that I'm going to be working with, I tend to try and tailor the script to their strengths as much as possible, or to what I think, to where I think they would really excel, the things that they did do really well. I try and have a conversation with the artist beforehand and just see like what kind of things are they interested in drawing, what kind of story are they interested in working on, just to try and make it as collaborative as possible. Like I said, some artists will just take the script, go off and do the thing. There's some where I'm constantly in contact throughout the whole process. They'll shoot me text messages or phone me up while they're working on a page to run an idea by me, or to just sort of spitball some ideas that they had for how we could do something differently. My favorite are those type of relationships, though, where it's really that both of us are equally involved and we're constantly in contact and constantly sort of taking apart the story, looking at it from different angles, trying to figure out the way to make it as good as possible. Like I said before, I would prefer. I like it when you can see equal amounts of fingerprints from the two of us all over the project, rather than just somebody who's using a script I wrote as a blueprint to go ahead and build the house. So it's different all the time. But when it was really great when you have that sort of almost symbiotic relationship with an artist, it's just absolutely incredible. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, in doing research for the show, we discovered that you wrote a crossover that we never knew we needed. The X-Files Conspiracy Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. How in the world did a project like that come about?
It was a weird one. IDW called me up and told me that they were doing like a publishing line wide X-Files crossover. So there was a Ninja Turtles crossover issue. There was a Transformers crossover, X-Files Transformers. I think there was an X-Files Ghostbusters one. Anyway, they wanted to know if I was interested in doing the X-Files Ninja Turtles crossover. And I just didn't understand how that would work. And at first, it was very early on for me professionally, and normally, like I wasn't in a position to turn much down. Like I needed work, but at the same time, I was just like, I just don't see how this would work. And I asked for a few days to think about it, and at that time, I'm not sure if you guys remember when the first of the newer Ninja Turtles films came out, and there was the rumor going around that they were going to be aliens rather than mutated turtles. It was going around for a couple months, and everyone was real angry.
Yes.
And that actually happened to coincide at the same time that I was thinking about this. So I'm like, oh, maybe if they think they're aliens, and we can play around with that idea. That ended up coming up with an idea that is actually like also a semi sequel to one of my favorite X-Files episodes, which is called I think it's Bad Blood. It's written by Vince Gillian, who went on to do Breaking Bad, and it's about a group of vampires that are delivering pizzas. And sort of doping up the pizzas so that the people they deliver them to become more pliable and more easy for them to attack and drain their blood. If you haven't seen it, it's actually really good and weirdly a really funny episode of X-Files, and it's got like a younger Luke Wilson in it. And that episode's told from Scully's perspective and then Mulder's perspective. So, in Scully's perspective, Luke Wilson is just absolutely a stunner, handsome. And then from Mulder's perspective, he's got like buck teeth and is just like a country hick. I just watch the episode. It's really funny. But, vampires delivering pizzas, I thought was a great in for the Ninja Turtles. And so I managed to sort of bring that all together and come up with an issue that I think is actually a lot of fun. I tried not to take it too seriously. I tried to just have some fun with it, but still tried to tell, a satisfying story for readers. But yeah, I agree. It's such a weird crossover. To this day, I'm still surprised it happened.
Well, tell us about Catch and Release. Nothing grabs your attention quite like the moniker "A Murder Book Story."
So, Catch and Release it's a standalone graphic novel that we're kickstarting to put out in hardcover, and it's the premise of it is very loosely we have an ex-car thief who steals a car. To back up a bit, sorry, I guess like he sort of right now we kind of I didn't want to dwell on the pandemic at all in the comic, even though it takes place during this current pandemic, but I did want to involve it somehow and acknowledge it. And part of the way that I did that is that this main character, he works in construction, and he's not working right now, and as a result, he's completely broke. He's drowning in debt. He's about to get kicked out of his rental because he can't pay his rent. He's got child support. There's a million bills hanging over his head, and sort of one of the ways he kind of acts out just to take some control is he steals a car just to see if he can. He used to steal cars when he was younger all the time. He's a bit older now, and he just wants to, see if he can still do it. And sure enough, he can. And he's got this car in his garage now, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He knows he can sort of piece it out, sell out parts, but he needs money fast. So him and his friend, who's named Kris, they come up with this plan. They know they can't actually sell the car because they don't have the paperwork to sell the car. In Nova Scotia here, you need a certificate to transfer ownership that is not kept anywhere. Obviously in the car, it's something you keep at home in your file. So they come up with this plan to list the car for sale. And what they're going to do is list the car for sale. It's $6,500 they're selling it for. And in the ad, very bold, it says cash only. And their plan is to lure out unsuspecting buyers, like to a remote location, show them the car, let them test drive it and stuff, and get them ready to buy, and then rob them at gunpoint. And they have this plan that if they can do this multiple times, they can clear almost 20 grand, and they're both going to be fine. They're both not, going to have to worry about money for a little bit. It's short-term thinking, but it's a way of getting out of the debt. On the other side, we have Samir and Alex. Samir is a student who is moving from Halifax to Vancouver, and his car has given out on him. It just died, and he's got only a few days before he has to leave. He's desperate to get a new car. Finds Andrew's ad on a local marketplace news website, and so it goes out to inspect and buy this car. And that is kind of where the story really kicks off. That's everything I described as sort of the opening bits of the story. The story is really about what happens during that robbery, how things go badly wrong, how the four characters either try to escape or deal with the situation that they're in, and what is not necessarily a minor crime, but it's not a violent crime, becomes something else completely different. And so it's about them dealing with the consequences of what they've done and trying to keep themselves out of prison. It gets pretty dark. It gets a little bit upsetting, and I'll say not everyone makes it out alive. So that's basically the story.
That's fascinating. In a lot of ways, Catch and Release is a return to what brought you your first bit of notoriety as a writer. What makes the crime genre so special to you? What inspired your affinity for it?
I've always just been drawn to crime fiction, be it like comics, novels, film. I grew up in a house when my parents were still together. My dad was a police officer, and my mom was a nurse who worked for a while with victim services, which was sort of an on-call unit that would be called out to very specific sort of victim situations where they needed a nurse on hand. So that was kind of like dinner table talk growing up, like, hearing about my dad's day on the force, my mom's day dealing with the situation she was. So it was kind of around. Then when I was, a young teen, up until I was probably about 17, I was a bit of a juvenile delinquent as well, getting into lots of trouble. And I think I still, I mellowed out around the time I was 18, 17, 18. I became like a real chicken. Would not do the stuff I did when I was younger. Like I never killed anyone or anything like that. But I got up some mischief, and so I think that it's just always something. There's always been this sort of interest in that, and I think part of what sort of set me. There's a few things that sort of set me straight. And one was like my mom moved us, my parents split, and my mom moved us to the other side of the country, and got me out of the sort of the environment I was in when I was younger, which sort of helped things. And, I had sort of a bit of a run-in with the law when I was about 16, I think. Nothing too serious, but serious enough to scare me straight, I think. And so like that was just sort of, growing up, a bit of the environment I was in, and sort of how I was living at the time. But then even after I sort of straightened out, got my nose clean, I was always sort of fascinated with crime fiction and crime, just sort of in general, like even, reading a lot of nonfiction reporting on it. And I have had I wrote a book called The Violent, which was about a couple of recovered drug addicts in Vancouver and the effects sort of one of them sliding back into past addiction, and the effect of the housing market in Vancouver, which is crazy, and has like a lot of sort of downward pressure on those in lower income brackets. That story, was very loosely based on a couple that I knew that moved to Vancouver and had fallen into drugs. So there are sometimes parts of my life that I do pull into these stories, like parts of things that I've been around, but I fictionalize it as much as possible. But yeah, it's just something that fascinates me. And I kind of rambled on that answer. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. It's fascinating, kind of getting a peek behind the curtain. A lot of times, I myself, it's like, I used to watch this TV show growing up, or I used to read, these types of novels and things. But here, like, kind of a source of inspiration being like actual, personal life events is really a change from what we're used to hearing in a lot of interviews. So it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, like I, even though I was a bit of a juvenile, like I was not any sort of like little gangster or anything like that. I was, it was mostly just like, shitty kid you went to high school with doing crappy things because he's angry all the time, stuff, and lots of shoplifting and stuff as well. But yeah, a lot of shoplifting. I used to get in a lot of fights when I was younger, just because, yeah, I don't know, just an angry kid.
Sounds like a character from like a 90s sitcom or something. Now, with titles on your resume like Ghost Rider, the two Logan titles, Uncanny X-Men, New Mutants, why is returning to a creator-owned title like this the right decision right now?
I'd always thought that I would be able to balance work for hire work and creator-owned work, because I spent, like I said earlier, like, I've spent since like 94 doing creator owned stuff and self-published work. But it turns out that, like, the work for hire stuff it just demanded so much of my time that I just didn't have time for creator owned, which is, not a complaint. It's great to be busy. It's great to have a lot of work on my plate. It's great to be able to keep the lights on and such. But with the whole pandemic, work slowed down for a while, and I'd always been talking about how I wanted to get back to creator owned, and also, like, just like pandemic aside, like, not if we just took out the pandemic, it's been a weird and really crappy year. Like, there's just been like one thing after another happening just on my end here, and I know for a lot of people as well that there's a domino effect by the pandemic. But just like, it's been a weird year. I felt sort of off, I guess, just because I've just been dealing with some weird shit, and I felt like I needed to sort of just center myself and needed to just take some time and just work on something that would bring me joy. And again, not to say that the books I've worked on at Marvel don't, but it's just like, there's something else about a creator owned thing where it kind of feeds your soul a little bit more. And murder book specifically is something I wanted to get back to. And so when things slowed down, I knew I needed to, grab hold of that time, take advantage of it, and make sure I didn't waste any of it. And so I just sat down and started writing Catch and Release. And yeah, here we are.
The artwork from Lysandro Asterin is incredibly impactful. Tell us a little bit about your working relationship with him and the decision to go with black and white art in particular.
So he and I worked on a book together several years ago at Boom Studios called The Last Contract, which was a story about an 80-year-old retired hitman who was who was showing signs of early onset Alzheimer's, who wakes up one night to find out that someone's trying to kill him, and he doesn't know why. And it sets off this journey where he goes cross country with his incontinent dog and tries to sort of figure out why these people are trying to kill him. He's been out of the hitman business for over 25 years. And that was like just an incredibly fun book to work on. And Lissandro in particular, his artwork was just so incredible. It was such a good mood for the entire book. He's got like a European sensibility that I love a lot. That reminds me of one of my favorite artists, which is a guy named GP, who like they're not the same, but they have this like style wise, but similar sensibilities, and I just kind of love it. And one of the things when we did the last contract is when his pages would come in, he'd do these beautiful ink wash black and white pages, and the coloring on like we brought in a colorist who colored everything, and the colorist was great, made it look great, but the black and white stuff, there was just something so powerful about it that I knew that if I ever got a chance to work with him again, I wanted to do something that was just straight black and white. And also, the Murder Book historically has been in black and white. We did a couple short stories in color that were printed in the back of an image book a while ago, but everything else had been in black and white. And so when I was working on this one, when I was writing it, I kind of had Lissandro in mind, even though I hadn't talked to him. I didn't know if he was available. I was in the zone when I was writing it and kind of didn't want to break that, didn't want to jinx myself by talking to artists when I'm halfway through a script. But, thankfully he was available. Weirdly, at the same time, there's an a publisher from Argentina that is publishing a translated edition of The Last Contract, the book we worked on. And so he and I ended up doing an interview together for this publisher, for promotional purposes. And afterwards, we just got to talking. He and I had talked a lot when we were working on The Last Contract and had talked about working together again. I think I tried to get him on a project a few years ago, but he was tied up, I think, with Redneck when he was starting that. And so that didn't work out. But it just managed to hit him at a time where he had a gap in his schedule. I had the script and he was ready to go. And he's got one of those relationships that I talked about earlier where we will converse back and forth about pages and talk about them. He sends, sometimes if he thinks about changing things, he'll send some ideas, and they're always great. And so it's an incredibly collaborative process between he and I, and I'm loving it. And his pages are just beautiful.
Yeah, there's something so raw, especially, I think with it being in black and white too, that's just incredibly evocative too. Just seeing just what's on the Kickstarter site.
I'm actually quite curious. This is something that I've been discussing with some other comic book friends in the past. And that I was wondering, since you seem to enjoy black and white art, what is your take on them reissuing the Walking Dead series now as a color comic book? I always found that book works so well in black and white. I was kind of surprised they decided to go that route. I'd be interested what your take is on that.
My take is going to be a little bit colored, no pun intended, because it's a good friend of mine who's coloring it, who has been working on it for like 4 years. And that guy actually hid that he was working on it for so long. I knew he was working on a big project, but he wouldn't say what it was. But I think it's fine. Like, I think if it still works in color, Dave McKay, who's coloring it, is a smart colorist. I think he's going to do great work on it. For me, either way is fine. I think some stuff needs to just stay in black and white. I think The Walking Dead, from what I've seen so far, works in color. So I don't have a strong opinion about that particular book, like being in color or being in black and white. I think either is fine.
All right.
Now, we featured several creators on the show who have utilized crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo for their personal projects. What's your take on this, pretty momentous shift towards sites like these for creators?
Yeah, well, so I've been eyeballing Kickstarter for a while now, and this is just the first time where I've managed to sit down and write something that would fit there. I think it's interesting because right now, because of the pandemic, because of future, economic uncertainty, publishers are a little bit more hesitant than normal to take risks. So they're really looking for things that, they can reasonably expect will do well for them. And I think some creators, we've got like pet projects that we want to do that we think are worth the risk, but it's sometimes hard to convince publishers that it is. With catch and release, in for instance, it's hard to convince a publisher to do a 72 page black and white hardcover graphic novel. It's not something that kind of fits within their publishing framework for the most part. So for me, it just seemed like the logical choice to take it to Kickstarter, to just do this thing that we want to do without having to capitulate any part of the process to anyone else. I think I like it because it creates more of an intimate situation, I think, where you're dealing it's almost like a direct relationship just between the reader and the creator, and you don't have to worry about the publisher and the distributor and such. I have added a tier where we are trying to, and I think I've seen others do the same, where they are trying to make sure that local comic shops aren't left out of the whole process, so that they can still carry the book and get it to their customers. But I think it's just it's a great site for folks to take some risks and do books that might be just harder to push through a traditional publisher. And I think ultimately that's going to be good for both creators and for readers. I think you're going to get interesting projects, and it just opens yourself up to be able to experiment some more and do some fun stuff.
Now, you also have some really incredible rewards for this Kickstarter, including original art pieces, an appearance in the book itself, and our absolute favorite, script reviews from yourself and fellow creators Matthew Rosenberg and Kelly Thompson. Can you tell us more about that?
About specifically the script reviews or everything?
The whole thing is fascinating, but the script reviews in particular are interesting.
Yeah, well, I think, in creating the tiers, we're just trying to figure out what it is, what would people want, what's exciting for folks, what are they going to want to back. For myself, I always want original art pieces. That appearance in the book, I wasn't sure, but like that went in like 5 minutes. I think it was absolutely just gone immediately. The script reviews are things that I've seen other people do on their Kickstarters. I think, it's something that is helpful for folks who are trying to break into the industry, or they want to do their own book, but don't necessarily have access to editors or don't have access to people who are working in the industry. So I think it's an interesting way to sort of get some sort of direct feedback and get some guidance, and hopefully that helps whoever backs it, get their project off the ground, or maybe just tighten up their script or whatever it is. I'm nervous about doing it, but yeah, I think those are things I like to see when I'm looking at a Kickstarter, and so just figured we'd turn around and just offer the same.
Are there any other projects that are coming up in addition to Catch and Release that you have the ability to tease your audience, or are you bound by secrets?
Yeah, unfortunately, so one of the frustrations of this pandemic again is that I actually was in the process of wrapping up most of the books I had currently been working on just before the pandemic hit. And I was feeling like I sort of alluded to earlier, I was a little bit, there some stuff that happened early in the year that is not overly tragic. It's just like, house problems that I had to fix that was stressing me out. So I needed to take like a little bit of downtime, right? So I was handing off some stuff, and I wasn't really setting up new projects at Marvel just because I needed just a few weeks to get my bearings. And it just happened that those few weeks I was getting my bearings is when the pandemic really affected everything, and all of a sudden all new projects got put on hold. So I wasn't starting on new projects as soon as I was hoping. So, I didn't start until later. And as a result, those announcements have been pushed back. So there's nothing I can, this is a very long explanation for why I can't announce anything. But yeah, I have projects coming up, but they're not coming out until early next year. And so I can't really say what they are. I'm pretty excited about them. And I'm still here I'm talking to a couple publishers about doing creator-owned stuff as well. And a couple other things in the works. So I've got a lot in the works and not anything I can talk about.
Well, we'll definitely keep our eyes peeled for any upcoming announcements. So where can our listeners go to support you, your work, and particularly Catch and Release?
So you can find me on Twitter, and I'm just at Ed Brisson. And from there, I am all over Twitter, being like a total carny barker right now, trying to get everyone to back Catch and Release. So if you follow me on Twitter, you will see me talk about Catch and Release probably about 4 or 5 times a day. Yeah, I think if you just the easiest thing is just go to Kickstarter and search Catch and Release. You can find the book there. You can see some of the stuff we are offering. One of the stretch goals we just offered, if we hit 20,000, which we're closing in on, we're going to be releasing a digital director's cut of the book, which is like 200 plus pages of the book, which includes the original script. It includes all the thumbnails, the character designs, all the pencil pages, then the final ink pages, a bunch of location photos that I took for Lysandro. So, we're still adding more in terms of rewards. So, if we hit 20,000, then everybody who's backed it already gets that director's cut. So yeah, it's but mostly just find me on Twitter. That's the easiest place. Or you can check out my website, which is edbrisson.com, and you could subscribe to my newsletter through there, which I usually send out about once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending. And lately, I've been including some free comics in there for folks to read.
All right, Ed, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Ed Brisson. The book is Catch and Release, a murder book story. Head to Kickstarter and support that. I personally, at the 11th hour, I was able to get that early bird special and get my hardcover edition. So super excited to see this develop. Ed, thanks so much for stopping by the show today.
All right, thanks a lot.
When we come back from this, our final break, we're going to hit you with 2 more nerd commendations for this and another week. Welcome back to our final segment, Nerd Commendations. We own the patent on this, and we will pursue legal litigation if you use without expressed or written consent of Dave and Kris. Dave, your nerd commendation makes me very, very happy, and something that I did not know existed. What do you have for us?
So I've spoken several times on this podcast about the impact Batman the Animated Series had on me as a child. It inspired a wave of comic book reading and continues to stand as my all-time favorite Batman adaptation. And I don't think I'm alone in that assessment. So imagine my delight when DC Comics essentially decided to bring the band back together. In April of 2020, they launched Batman The Adventures Continue, a digital-first comic that is a continuation and expansion of the animated series continuity. The book is co-written by Paul Dini and Alan Burnett, producers on the original series, and illustrated by Ty Templeton, who's worked on previous animated series-inspired comics. The book makes an effort to continue the visual and storytelling style of the original series. At the same time, it also introduces characters that were never seen in the original series, such as Azrael, Deathstroke, and even second Robin Jason Todd. To say that I love this book would probably be an understatement. It definitely tickles my nostalgia bone, but it also stands as a high-quality Batman adaptation. In an age when Animaniacs and Tiny Toons are celebrating revivals, why can't Warner bring back this gem of a show? Now, if we can't have the animated series back itself, at the very least we have this comic book. And if you like the animated series, if you like Batman, and if you like good storytelling, read Batman The Adventures Continue. Paul Dini writing Batman again is good in my book at any point.
Well, I'm excited to hear that it actually holds up. And I'm a person who's very, very cautious and very, very skeptical at times when it comes to nostalgia. Sometimes, things are best left, in the past and when you enjoyed them, and sometimes you can't go home again. I'm a huge Chris Claremont fan, and when he returned to a lot of the X-Men books, the stories, you just couldn't recapture that magic. So I was excited, but then, also like, a little bit cautious, but hearing that it actually holds up, and that, they were able to recapture that spark and then that inspiration, and then it's actually a good story, as we, pine for so often on this show. That's really, really exciting, and I'm definitely checking this one out.
Yeah, and it's so nice to know that these writers have not missed a step. The voice of each character is so clear in the writing. You can almost hear Kevin Conroy's Batman voice coming out of the comic book. It is absolutely amazing. So, Chris, what is your nerd commendation for this week?
Well, I kind of buried the lead a couple of weeks ago with this series, but I'm giving it its full nerd commendation here, and that's Amazing Spider-Man: Renew Your Vows. There are actually 2 volumes of this. The first volume is just a 5-issue, just mini series that was written in 2015 by Dan Slott with art by Adam Kubert. And this was taking place during the Secret Wars, where, you had all these different, battle realms and stuff with that event going on. And it takes place in an alternate reality of Earth 18119, in which Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and Mary Jane Watson are married and have a daughter named Annie. So basically, it's like, what if one more day would have never happened, and they would just, stayed married, and you get to see Peter Parker as a dad, and it's the most wholesome and the most beautiful thing. And Annie is just awesome. Like, she is such a compelling, such a fun character. She's full of piss and vinegar, and you just cannot help but just adore Annie Mae Parker. And then it was a really, really well received. And then they brought it back in 2016, and it ran through 2018 as part of the Marvel Now, the second volume. And that was, taken up, written by Jerry Conway. And the art was done by Ryan Stegman. And Jerry Conway actually left the book after about 8 or 9 issues, because he had a disagreement with editorial about the inclusion of Venom. So then Ryan Stegman took over, the writing, actually, and then had various artists on after that. And then after that arc finished, I was like, okay, so it looks like this is about to end. But then Jodie Hauser came in and breathed kind of new life into the series with issue 13. And I'm currently, reading up the last final issues, but she fast forwards 8 years, and Annie is now in high school. And, it's really cool to see her as like a 16-year-old sophomore. And you can't help but look at the parallels between herself and Peter from, the Lee Ditko era, and just, seeing the generation continue, and just seeing her fleshed out as a character in her own right, and kind of stepping out of the shadow of her parents, and having some, identity of her own. And she was actually involved in a Spider-Geddon spinoff called Spider Girls. And Spider-Geddon, was another one of those, let's mash up all the Spider characters and look at this. This is cool. And the Spider-Geddon proper was, kind of boring and not so eventful. And I honestly think the best thing to come out of that was the Spider Girls, supporting issues, where Annie was teaming up with 616 Spider-Girl Anya Corazon and Mayday Parker from MC2. And it was just really, really fun with really, really great characters, and just seeing them shine on their own. But Amazing Spider-Man: Renew Your Vows. Definitely check this one out. If you're a Spider-Man fan, it's just really wholesome, and it really captures the heart of Spider-Man comics.
It's so funny how we just talked about this a couple of episodes ago. The whole notion that ending the Spider marriage was not the key to more storytelling opportunities, but in fact eliminated potential stories, well, like this one. I loved Renew Your Vows with a red-hot glowing passion. The book basically represents what Spider-Man should have become post-Clone Saga, a husband and father who tries to balance family life with superheroics. And I really love the ongoing that spun out of the initial miniseries too. It's funny that I didn't quite enjoy aging up Annie as much. I see this as a pattern oftentimes in comic books that they don't want to linger on children just being children. Let kids be kids for a while. The Superman books under Bendis just did something similar not too long ago. John Kent was this great kid character. His relationship with Damian Wayne was super interesting. We got a great series out of that, the Super Sons. And then Bendis comes along, takes over Superman, and just ages him up into a teenager and ships him off with the Legion of Superheroes. And now he's just another moody teen. We get a lot of teenagers in comic books. I mean, a lot. So when we have a child character that is written as well as Annie Mae Parker is, as well as John Kent was, I would prefer if they stayed like that for a while. But yeah, I read this. I wish it was still going on. Or better yet, that the main continuity would try a setup like this for a while. So I totally echo your nerd commendation. Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows is, well, amazing, pun intended.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting that he did that when he did the exact same thing to Miles Morales, when he was writing that title. So maybe this is a trend for Bendis. But yeah, I absolutely agree. And it was so much fun. But at the same time, I enjoyed both. But either way, if you love Spider-Man, definitely check out this title. And that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We thank you so much for your support. We thank Ed Brisson for stopping by for this interview. Definitely go check out Catch and Release, a murder book story on Kickstarter. Some really fantastic. Just the fact that you can have scripts to reviews by Comics Pros is just really, really cool. So if you're an aspiring writer and you want somebody to look over your stuff, definitely go look over that as well. But again, thank you all so much for your support. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Nerd Byword. You can find us on Facebook at The Nerd Byword, and then individually on Instagram and Twitter at That Nerd Dave and That Nerd Kris, respectively.
And if you enjoy the show, please be sure to drop us a 5-star rating and a review at whatever podcasting platform that you catch us on. We are, of course, available on Apple Podcasts and pretty much any other platform imaginable, including now on Amazon Music.
And as always, we want you to stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez and show art by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.